Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being part of our webinar today. This is part of the Spring and Summer 21 Leap Texas webinar series. If this is your first time tuning into one of our webinars, welcome. If you're a returning guest, we're glad to have you again. And I do encourage you to keep a lookout on the future webinars that we're going to be having coming out as part of the series. We have one scheduled for the end of the month, doing one on April 29th. And we're going to be scheduling additional webinars throughout the months of May and June as well. So I do encourage you to think about those and consider registering. But thank you for being here today. We are very excited to have Dr. Eddie Watson joining us from the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U. He's going to be talking today about assignment design, open educational resources, and faculty development, and talking about some of the tools and opportunities coming out of AAC&U. Leap Texas is a partner with AAC&U through the Leap States Initiative, and we are always glad when we can collaborate with our partners at AAC&U and learn what's going on with them and learn what's going on and the great work of institutions from around the country. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to Eddie.
All right, Jeff, thank you for that introduction, and thanks for inviting me to speak to some of your colleagues within the great state of Texas. It's always a good opportunity to try to connect what we're doing at AAC&U with those on campuses, so really appreciate the opportunity to be able to have an opportunity to share some of the new things that we're doing at AAC&U. So, when Jeff and I were chatting about this, he sort of kind of opened up the door and encouraged me to share anything that I would really like to about what's going on at AAC&U. So I've kind of got 4 areas that I'll be speaking to or about during my time with you today. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the new employer research study that was just released this month from AAC&U. We do a report, a study about every 2 years. So the latest one is now out, freely available online at aacu.org. And then we're going to transition from that, and actually some of the findings really support a new thrust coming out of AAC&U's value work. I'm going to focus really specifically on something called the value add tool set that is emerging. So we'll move from that to talking about a new partnership that AAC&U has around faculty development, really looking at how to scale up and make faculty development affordable and to provide a tool set that Centers for Teaching and Learning might be able to leverage. This is a brand new partnership. In fact, we haven't talked about it anywhere thus far. We just got the contract signed, and so this is the first opportunity for us to share a little bit about that. So you're definitely at the front of the line regarding that new information. And then we'll transition to talking a little bit about a brand new institute from AAC&U that launches in July. It's called the Institute on Open Educational Resources, so also known as OER. And I'm hoping to leave enough time for us to have a little bit of Q&A. But with that said, there is a chat window. I've got it open on my screen. Feel free to pose questions there. I'll try to keep an eye on it. I've also encouraged Jeff that if questions do pop up into the chat window, that he should interrupt me so that I can be sure to see the questions and address them in the context of what I'm saying, rather than waiting 40 minutes later whenever maybe it no longer makes much sense. But again, there will be Q&A at the end, but I'm happy to address questions during the talk. So with that said, let's jump into AAC&U's latest employer research. So we started doing this actually 2 years ago. Was the first time that we surveyed both executives and hiring managers. Actually, in the past, our earlier studies had focused just specifically on executives' perceptions of new college graduates. So those new candidates just graduating with a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree, what were their perceptions of those students and their skills? So we, instead of just focusing on executives who probably have a different perception and also may not have a lot of hands-on interviewing opportunities with the new graduates, we started interviewing hiring managers as well as executives, and there's been some interesting differences between those two populations. And actually, one of the things I'll be pointing out in this year's study, as we collected different sets of demographics, we'll be talking a bit about differences regarding age groups, which which may suggest different strategies we in higher education should be employing as we advise students who are going out on the job market. So as you can see, there's about there was exactly 500 respondents to our survey. It represented a wide swath of company sizes, a wide swath of industries. And the survey was actually administered during the summer of 2020. So as you sort of think about the arc of COVID and when this data was collected, definitely was not collected just this month. This does sort of reflect a snapshot that's about maybe 8 months back. So with that said, I have 5 specific things from the study that I want to share with you. And there's, again, a lot more that I could certainly unpack. I could spend probably 2 or 3 hours talking to you just about the survey. But again, the full report is available online freely. So feel free to go out to AAC&U and download it. So 5 specific findings I wanted to highlight. One was that employers view a college degree as more valuable than higher education as a whole. So to unpack that a little bit more, we asked the same questions back 2 years ago. Like we asked about, is getting a college degree, probably or definitely worth it? And really there was no change from 2018 to 2020. We saw that about 87% in both studies said that yes, getting a college degree is worth it. We asked a question specifically about hiring managers and executives' perceptions of confidence in higher education, and we saw a slight increase over this specific question back in 2018. We also asked about the skills that recent graduates have, and are they able to leverage those skills successfully in entry-level positions, and there was a slight increase over 2018 as well. We also asked questions about our recent college graduates, do they have the skills they need to be advanced or to be promoted? And we saw a really significant increase between 2018 and 2020. You can see there was a 25-point increase between, 3 years ago at this point, and then the study from 2020. So we found that really interesting. But what we also see here is that there's a slight trending upward of not public perception, but hiring manager and executive perceptions regarding preparedness for the job market, confidence in higher education in general. When we looked at, and this was one of the things that I mentioned early on in my introduction, that there are some differences between the way that different age groups. So when you look at those over the age of 40 versus those under the age of 40, employers under 40 are more likely to say a college degree is definitely worth it. And employers under the age of 40 believe recent graduates are very prepared on skills needed for success. So essentially what we're finding is that the younger employers were, they had a more positive perception of higher education and the students that were being produced by higher education. We also probed regarding mindsets as well as the general skills, so the essential learning outcomes in our survey. And what we found really interesting was you can sort of compare what you see in the green call-out box, which are some of the key or the highest rated essential skills that employers said that they were hoping for, that they found to be very important. But there were some other personal capacities that were rated even higher than those essential learning outcomes, such as, do candidates have a good work ethic? Do they have the ability to take initiative? Do they have self-confidence? Do they have persistence? Employers rated those as very important. Again, looking at those specific capacities and comparing those over the age of 50 in this case to those under the age of 40, those under the age of 40 saw leadership and empathy as more important skills or attributes than those over the age of 40. But those over the age of 50, those over the age of 50 saw work ethic as more important than those under the age of 40. So there's a different kind of perception that's kind of emerging here, which suggests that maybe we should advise students who are entering the job market to take some time to research who they are applying to, and then maybe they might frame their application given what we're generally seeing based upon the age of the employer. So certainly a generalization, but it might help a candidate who's entering the job market better speak to really what employers say that they're looking for based upon their age. There's a couple more of these points that I'll highlight as we go forward. Employers value the experiences shown by educational research to have the highest impact on student achievement. So again, this is this notion of high impact practices, and sort of rated in order of, I wouldn't call it importance, but how employers were rating them. Asked specifically, would you be more likely or much more likely to consider a candidate who had this experience? Internships are still kind of the king. So if an undergraduate student who graduates with an internship has that on their resume, the employer would be, much more likely to consider it than some of the other experiences. You'll see that experience working in community with people from diverse backgrounds and cultures is second on the list. If students had a job or engage in a work study while in college, that was third, much more likely to consider for the position if they had that experience. Completion of a portfolio or an e-portfolio showcasing skills and integrating college experiences, that was fourth on the list. Move my windows around a little bit. So looking specifically again at differences in age and which skills or experiences were valued the most. You can see that the dark green bar represents those under the age of 40, and those under the age of 40, as you can see here, are valuing service learning projects, experience working in community settings, more so than those that are older employers. So again, as a candidate, as we advise students who are building their resume, depending on if you're at a startup with a very young population that is running and owning and managing the company, it might make sense to highlight things a little bit differently, such as service learning experiences or working in community projects. If you have an older employer, they may not value it that much. There may be other things, depending on the context of the position that you're applying for, that you would be maybe more inclined to highlight. So a couple more things to highlight from the employer research. Most employers believe the skills of a liberal education are essential preparation for workforce success. And so looking specifically at the essential learning outcomes, the number one thing that employers rated as very important was the ability to work in teams. Perennially, critical thinking is always right there near the top as well. The ability to analyze and interpret data is third on the list of very important skills. The ability to apply knowledge in real-world settings was fourth on the list. So the full report has a much longer list and rates all of them, but you can see teamwork and critical thinking is at the top of the list. And we also found that overall, employers see room for improvement in the preparation of graduates for success in the workforce. So we were just talking about specific skills. We talked about teamwork and critical thinking. So we asked them about, is this a very important skill? And you can see the ratings in red there. And then we also ask, are new graduates very prepared to actually engage in that skill? So 39% of employers said that our students were very prepared to engage in critical thinking, while they said, 60% said this is very valuable. So we have called this the preparedness gap, the difference between very important and very prepared. And of all of the skills that we looked at, critical thinking was the one where we found the greatest gap. It's something that we see as very important. It's always number one and number two in our studies regarding what employers say that they really want from new hires. But we're also seeing this preparedness gap, which suggests this is an opportunity for us to improve the work that we do around critical thinking, which is really a perfect transition into our work around what I've described in my introduction as the value add tool. We actually are creating a new tool set that complements the value rubrics. And the new tool set is called the value add tools. And the first one that we've created, which is freely available online at aacu.org/value, new and focuses specifically on critical thinking. So this is really about assignment design, so helping faculty make better assignments, which would give opportunities for students to show more accurately their skills around, in this case, specifically critical thinking. And then as you assess that student work, then you would be assessing the product of assignments that probed students and prepared students and prompted students to show their critical thinking skills. So let me unpack this a little bit further. If you're not familiar with value stands for valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education. And so it's really been an assessment project really for the past 13 years or so. And we have 16 rubrics for scoring student work looking at a specific learning outcome. So we have a value rubric for critical thinking, for creative thinking, for ethical reasoning. All of these are freely available online. And so we're kind of moving forward with the value rubric project, knowing that it has been so widely successful. And as an example of its success, here's just a quick snapshot of where we currently were just a few weeks back, where we had seen our rubrics downloaded. I'm certain that we've passed 600,000 at this point from 139 countries, from 2,700 different colleges and universities. So we know the value rubrics are quite widely adopted in higher education, and so we're building out tools to further augment the work around assessment of student learning and to improve student learning. Indeed, so while we're focusing on assignments, there's several good reasons for it. One is that an assignment in and of itself does actually aid in the learning process. There's been quite a bit of research around the recall effect. A good example for someone to go and look up might be Henry Roediger at Washington University in St. Louis, who's done a lot of work for 15+ years on the recall effect. And essentially what he's found is every assignment we give our students, every exam we give our students, actually serves to further instantiate learning. Students, when you pull things out of your brain, you're revisiting those neural pathways. By revisiting those neural pathways, it strengthens those neural pathways. It ensures that students then are able to remember things that are important that were covered in the test into the future, further into the future. So really, every time we give a test or give an assignment, it's actually an act of pedagogy. It's an act of teaching. It's an act of helping students remember, learn, apply what you've been teaching within the class. So assignments have certainly a role in ensuring that we have products for assessing student learning, but they in and of themselves act as a strategy for learning. So assignments should emphasize what is important within the course, evoke student activity and work that really leads to targeting specifically defined learning outcomes. It should also provide guidance that accurately enables students to produce work displaying their knowledge, skills, and abilities. A study that Kate McConnell and Dan Sullivan did a few years back found clear connections between what we ask students to do and how well they do it. Before I joined AAC&U, I was the director of a Center for Teaching and Learning, and we had learning outcomes assessment within that center, specifically for gen ed assessment. And there was one specific project where we had a specific learning outcome in a specific discipline, and there were two different faculty who were teaching the same course toward the same learning outcome. There was also disciplinary learning outcomes, of course, for this gen ed course, but there were other learning outcomes associated with essential learning outcomes that they were targeting in their instruction. So we collected student work and went through the assessment process and found that one set of students in one course did reasonably well on that particular learning outcome. The other class didn't do that well at all. And so, initially you might say, well, maybe there's a difference between the quality of instruction in the two classes. Or you might say, well, maybe the two populations of students were, one was just stronger than the other. Maybe it was an 11 o'clock class versus an 8 o'clock class, and maybe there's a difference in that population. But when we further interrogated, we found out that one person teaching one of the classes was very aware that this specific learning outcome was tagged to that course. The other faculty member, who was actually a TA, was unaware that that learning outcome was tagged to the course. They were teaching this gen ed course, but they didn't know that there were gen ed learning outcomes associated with it. So you have one faculty member whose pedagogy prepared students to do an assignment that targeted a specific learning outcome. You had another faculty member who was just teaching within the discipline, doing good work teaching within the discipline, but was unaware that they were teaching toward a specific outcome. So the assignment didn't probe for that outcome. So we assessed that work, but then we found that there was just this disconnect. It was really just sort of a faculty awareness challenge that needed to be corrected. So it wasn't a pedagogical challenge or really differences between the student populations. It was just what was being asked of the students didn't ask them to provide evidence of that specific learning outcome. So what we ask students to do is clearly connected to how well they do it. And this is another reason why we're leaning into assignment design at this point. So when you think of sort of like the landscape or the ecology of good assignments and where it kind of fits in that notion, there's this idea of backwards design or backward design that suggest a process for building a course or building a module within a course where you would first define what are the learning outcomes associated with, you know, whatever the scope is of instruction that you're getting ready to engage in. And then after you define those learning outcomes, you would then decide on how would you know that students have achieved that specific learning outcome. So what is the assessment that you would give them? How do you gain evidence of their learning regarding that specific outcome? So in other words, what's the assignment? And then when you know the learning outcomes and then you know the assignment, then the pedagogical strategies that you then employ, you then have very clear targets. You know this is the outcome, you know this is the assignment that you want students to be able to do. So how do you best prepare students to complete that assignment that would then be assessed to show evidence of their capacities to do that work? So assignments are right in the middle of that process. They're very linked to the learning outcome. They should be tied to the learning outcome, and they create a clear target for instruction. So it's really this notion of instructional alignment, that one leads to the next, which leads to the next, and the assignment is right in the middle. So that's kind of the landscape associated with good course design and where assignments fit within it. So we put together a large panel of really international experts to come together and talk about how do we prepare faculty, how do we ourselves go through a process of creating better assignments. And so some of the questions that kind of came up were like, well, what should be in the assignment? And then also what should not be in the assignment? Like sometimes it's healthy to have distractors in an assignment or in a multiple choice quiz, but then, you know, how do you create the frame for what you would put within the assignment? Another question is, you know, are guidelines, expectations, evaluation criteria, are those all clear to students? Because invariably that's where students sort of have their first set of questions, like how much is this paper worth? How long should this paper be? That kind of stuff. And then you have your learning outcomes defined for that assignment, or you should. And so how do you create an assignment that then richly targets those learning outcomes? So really, that kind of distills down to kind of two areas that we focused on as we created these new tools that sort of partner with the value rubrics. We were looking at what really comprises this notion of clarity regarding expectations, and then what assignment elements need to be present that would specifically target a identified learning outcome. And again, based upon the employer research and the popularity broadly across higher education, our first focus has been on critical thinking. So the first value add tool that we have, and ADD stands for Assignment Design and Diagnostic Tools. So it's not a checklist really. It's not intended to be a rubric of any sort. It's supposed to be a document that can sort of serve to be in conversation with you as you might be creating a critical thinking assignment. So again, the first one is called the Value Add Tool for Critical Thinking. We're working on one currently that's focused on written communication, so that will certainly be out in 2021 at some point as well. But this tool and the tools that will follow that will all map back to the value rubrics. Of course, we've got 16 value rubrics. The aspiration is to have 16 value add tools for each of the learning outcomes that are comprised or covered in the value rubric. So that's where we're headed. But the design of the first tool, and this is sort of quoted from the cover sheet within, or the first page within the add tool, is this first tool is designed to help you and your colleagues develop and or revise an assignment designed to produce student work which develops, so it's also about teaching, and accurately demonstrates students' critical thinking abilities. So a little bit more deeply into what is in the value add tool. We see it, number one, as being used in a variety of different kinds of settings. It could be something that you alone, in your office at 10 p.m. could download and sort of be in conversation with alone, and it would help you kind of probe or think through what you might want to put in your assignment. And again, if you're teaching a freshman level intro course that has critical thinking as a learning outcome, it's not going to look the same as an assignment that's a senior level course or even a graduate level course that might be targeting critical thinking. So there's a lot of flexibility within the document. When you see all of the elements of what could comprise a critical thinking assignment, you as the designer of the assignment really would decide which one of these elements belong. There's a list of several, more than a dozen elements that comprise critical thinking. But the expectation would be based upon your outcomes. You would first decide what are the elements that you would include as part of that assignment. So the tool itself, you've got the first 2 pages are a sort of an information sheet that kind of describes its purpose and talks a little bit about backward design. There's also a glossary, so key terms that show up in multiple places throughout the tool itself. Those are defined specifically to provide context for how at least the tool is employing those words. Then there's 3 parts. There's part 1, which is a cover sheet where you kind of define the goals for your critical thinking assignment and the frame for what you're hoping to accomplish. So you kind of sort of almost set rules or guide rails for yourself regarding that critical thinking assignment. And then part 2 focuses specifically on assignment design elements, typically the things that you would find in any good assignment you'll see listed there. And then there are critical thinking elements themselves that you won't be surprised by this, that map back very closely to the value rubric for critical thinking. So if you're going to, again, it's this notion of instructional alignment, and if you're going to be scoring student work with the value rubric for critical thinking, then it would make sense that the assignment design tool would inform your creation of a tool that would, again, probe and enable students to display their critical thinking skills that would then, of course, map to the value rubric. So there's, again, this notion of instructional alignment kind of throughout the work that we're doing here around the value add tool. So these are just screen grabs of the tool itself. And again, the tool is available freely online. If you just go to aacu.org/value, along the right-hand side, you'll see value add tool. You click that, and that's where we're going to have all of the tools eventually. But the first one, the critical thinking tool, is located there. So as you can see, the first 3 questions are you setting kind of like what is the context, who is the audience for the student work, what assumptions are you making regarding your students, like what do they already know, what skills do they bring to the assignment. But you'll also see, and this relates to part 3 that we'll get to here in just a second, but that here's a number of different things, most of them evoked within the value rubric, that could comprise a critical thinking assignment. So you would first kind of go through and say, yeah, this is something they will be doing this. I hope that they'll be able to do this. Maybe this is too advanced, or this just simply isn't part of what I've been teaching over the last 3 weeks. So I wouldn't expect this to be a component of this particular assignment. So if you're working alone, this provides you with a framework. If you're working with a colleague who has handed you a critical thinking assignment that they're using in their class, if they provided you with this cover sheet as you might provide feedback on their critical thinking assignment, this provides context. So if a student isn't asked to discuss its implications, explain why something is important and discuss its implications, if that isn't in there, knowing that that was not the intention of your peer, your colleague, is helpful as you might move forward with the value add tool. So this is part one, kind of a cover sheet framing what your intentions are with the assignment. Part two is specifically looking at a variety of things that you would see, kind of structural elements for well-designed assignments. So there's a variety of different things listed here. You know, is the format clear, the length, citation style, grammatical expectations, stuff like that. Have you included that within the assignment? And you can see that there's three different areas here, like for each column, each row. If you were reviewing a peer's or reviewing an assignment you used last semester, you might go, oh yeah, this wasn't specified, or this is kind of vague. Here's an opportunity for improvement. Or this is, I did a good job here. This is clearly specified. So there's also a place in the gray boxes for you to leave feedback, either for yourself or for a peer. So as you sort of work through this and reflect upon a pre-existing assignment or begin to make a new assignment, you know, do you have these pieces in place? And then part three specifically has critical thinking elements. So well-designed critical thinking assignments may or may not, again, have all of these components, but how you completed the cover sheet would then guide where you are as you reflect upon an assignment or think about building an assignment around critical thinking. So you'll notice the very first column says intended, yes or no. So if a colleague had shared an assignment with you, you might go to part one and see, okay, yeah, this was intended, this was not intended. So the not intended, then you would not expect to find them present within the assignment. So really that would be a row that you would not necessarily engage with, while the other rows that were intended to be a part of the assignment are where you might focus your attention. So again, you might note that, well, this just really isn't relevant for the assignment, or it's not there at all. Maybe it should be, or it's there, but it's kind of vague. You know, students might struggle with just the language or not understand what should be, what's really intended by this. And then are there clear instructions? You might note that, yes, they've done a great job in a certain area. So there are a couple of different value rubrics that are kind of evoked in different parts here. So we kind of noted that in the last column. So if you were looking for where were these elements drawn from, and you pull up the value rubrics, you can see where they are and how they're noted in the value rubrics. So there are 6 on this page, and there's actually a second page that has 7 different elements as well. So that's pretty much the value add tool. Again, it's freely available online at aacu.org/value. We imagine this being used in a lot of faculty development settings, or being used by individual faculty to improve their own critical thinking assignment, or kind of start from scratch. We've had this used at a few different universities as a part of a couple of grant projects thus far, and we've heard really positive feedback from how helpful this has been for folks. Again, not intended to be a check sheet, just really intended to be kind of a guide on the sides, almost a document to be in conversation with as you think through how to make the best assignment possible. So moving beyond assignment design and talking about 2 more things, just briefly, I want to mention a new partnership or relationship that AAC&U has entered into with a company called 1HE, which is providing online faculty development training modules, so teaching and learning training modules. If you're an AAC&U member, there's actually a discount. Your AAC&U membership gets you a discount on 1HE. But we're just entering into this relationship, and we'll be working together to create some content going forward. But it's a pretty well established, pretty well developed teaching and learning a tool set. I think the thing that excites me most about it is the price point is exceptionally low, especially compared to other competitors in this market space. So if you're doing this kind of work, if your Center for Teaching and Learning has purchased online modules in the past, you might want to point them to this. And there's a way that you can kind of go and get more information and get an account on the system. And that's the last web address there, 1he.org/institutions. But you'll definitely be hearing more and more about this from AAC&U and 1HE, and probably lots of other places as well, as we move forward into the coming year. But I wanted to highlight this to you and give you the opportunity to take a look if you're so interested in this area of stuff. And so finally, the last thing I want to talk a little bit about is a new institute from AAC&U focused specifically on open educational resources. And to locate this on our website, you would go to aacu.org/OER. And the application deadline for this institute is coming up pretty quick. It's about 2 weeks away at this point. So April 30th is the deadline. So a little bit about the rationale for our interest, AAC&U's interest in OER these days. Well established is the notion of OER for affordability purposes. So OpenStax reports over $1.4 billion in direct student savings thus far, really since probably about 2012, I would imagine, whenever they launched sort of the current iteration of OpenStax. But 4.4 million students have used an OpenStax OER at this point. There have been a few other studies that have found that affordability is really almost kind of the tip of the iceberg for why we should all be interested in OER these days. There's a study that found that students enrolled in OER courses earned more credits than those not in OER courses, suggesting that those financial savings enabled students to take additional classes from, in one given semester, from one semester to the next. So that's an interesting student success outcome associated with OER adoption. Also, it's been found that providing free materials on the first day of class tends to level the academic playing field. I mean, if you and I went to the same high school, had the same SAT, the same grade point average, got into the same college or university, but just because of socioeconomics, you had the textbook on the first day of class, and so I had to work through kind of financial aid, and then I got the textbook maybe 2 weeks deep into the class, and then maybe at the end of the third week, we had our first test or exam. I would tend to think that you might do better on that test, having had all of the course materials on the first day of class, than I would not having those materials and sort of struggling to have access. So that's indeed the rationale behind these findings, that in courses that have OERs, in pretty much comparisons from the same faculty member but from one semester to the next, where they switched from an expensive textbook to a free OER that everyone had access to, failure rates decreased significantly and overall grades raised. And actually those students who were Pell eligible, their grades, I mean, everybody's grades went up, but it tended to close the performance gap at the end of the class. Looking at end of course grades, and end of course grades we certainly hope is some indicator of learning. So this suggests OER as an equity strategy, as a learning strategy, as a student success strategy, and as an affordability strategy. So lots of opportunities when done well. OER adoption and usage by a faculty member, by a college or university, has the opportunity to be very beneficial from a number of different respects. So how do we make sure that students and institutions benefit from this full breadth of OER opportunity? That's kind of what the Institute is intended to be. So the purpose of the Institute is to help campuses and educators launch or expand or accelerate campus engagement with and or adoption of free instructional materials. So whether it's authoring textbooks, whether it's fostering the adoption of OER, whether it's around course redesign, this institute is intended to help an institution do the work that they need to do, that they aspire to do around OER. Really, a campus can be at any stage in the process, and this institute would be a good match for them. Each institution would be expected to send a team of 5 or more to participate in the Institute's activities. So the goals of the Institute are to help a campus clearly articulate why they're engaging in OER and what they hope to accomplish, to help them discern evidence-based theory to practice models and strategies that would help them develop, utilize, and adopt OER, to help those that come to the Institute identify collaborators either within their institution or beyond their institution, and how to form those key partnerships, how to utilize evidence-based innovation and leadership strategies to increase the probability of successful scaling of your OER initiative, And really the goal, the way that it's set up, it's entirely designed to help a campus come up with a comprehensive OER action plan and strategy to meet the goals that they define for themselves as they enter the institute. So AAC&U has had an institute model for well over 3 decades, and that model has always focused on the use or the instantiation of campus teams to go and work on a specific project. So you yourself may have been to the High Impact Practices Institute or the Institute on General Education and Assessment. So these institutes in the past have had conference-like sessions across a week and time for teams to meet and plan. And each campus has assigned to them a resident faculty member, a mentor, to help them move through their planning and get to the point where they have an action plan to go back and engage in this work when they return to their campus. These have historically been just week-long events, like you might travel to the University of Vermont to focus for a week on building an action plan for Gen Ed, and then you go back to your campus and you get to work on that. This new Institute on Open Educational Resources is taking a different approach. Yes, a campus team of 5 or more, but this specific model is intended to be a year-long online experience, so there's no travel costs associated with it. It also is intended to be an opportunity for a campus to build an action plan, to launch a pilot and see a pilot through during the fall 2021 semester. And then as they're launching and sustaining the pilot, they're planning for a much larger strategy and initiative into the spring semester and beyond. And because it's a year-long experience, as you do this work, and if you get stuck or if you need to talk to someone who has been through this before, you have the entirety of the resident faculty of the Institute to be in touch with. You'll certainly have your own single mentor, but this sustained collaborative work over the span of a year, we believe will help a campus meet its OER goals. So across that year, there'll be a range of virtual events and opportunities for team interaction. So not just you working alone, but other campuses that are at a similar stage or have similar goals, you'll be able to chat with them and get feedback. There's national experts, as I mentioned, assigned to each team, and there's going to be ongoing support as you develop plans and as you put those plans into action. So who should be on a campus team? Well, we imagine a diverse set of colleagues that would represent different silos on a campus. So, you wouldn't send 5 people from the Student Success Office or 5 people from Student Affairs. You'd probably have maybe a senior academic officer, certainly faculty members, maybe librarians, Center for Teaching and Learning staff, learning technologies professionals, someone from Student Affairs. You might even think about including someone from the Student Government Association, the Office of Online Learning, other college leaders, so a department head or an associate dean, for instance. Those might be those that you would evoke into your campus team. So I think campus team development is really, really key. And then there would be a team lead. So we'll be providing a lot of opportunities to bring people together, but then the work is actually going to happen back on an individual campus. So we really encourage the team leader to embrace that role as team leader back within their campus context, because they'll be leading a lot of the work, bringing people together over the span of that year. So who are the Institute faculty for the Institute on OER? These are some names I imagine some of you recognize. Jose Bowen, former dean and college president, also author of the Teaching Naked books. Jeff Gallant, who's program director for Affordable Learning Georgia. As you look through this, you'll see lots of different kinds of institutions, large institutions, all the way through community colleges. You've got David Harris, who's editor-in-chief from OpenStax at Rice University. I'm on the faculty as well. We have someone, Caleb Keith, who is an expert at survey design. So as you think about your data needs and maybe having assistance in crafting instruments for some of the data work on your campus and data analysis on your campus, Caleb would be a great colleague for you. So lots of great people who have represented and been engaged in OER work for a while. So key dates, if this sounds interesting to you and your campus, the application date is April 30th. Notifications will be sent on May 12th or no later than May 12th. The kickoff will take place on 2 days, July 26th and 27th. There'll be a pre-spring semester check-in as a full group institute event on December 6th, and then a capstone closing event on the 25th and 26th. There's monthly meetings. There's mentorship opportunities as well, where your campus would meet essentially team on one with your campus mentor. So those can happen at whatever rate or pace that you would like. If you'd like to meet every other week, that's great. If you'd rather just meet quarterly, that's fine as well. We also have a new online collaboration platform from Higher Logic called Community. So there will be a space for ongoing conversation between and across campuses via that 24/7 asynchronous strategy as well. So lots of opportunities to kind of enable a campus to stay connected, to continue to work forward toward their goals, and to receive the support that they might like. So regarding fees for the Institute, the registration fee for the Institute will cover kind of everything associated with the Institute. Again, there's no travel, so there's no sort of surprise costs that your campus might incur over the span of a year. But these are the rates, and if you would like an additional team member, you can certainly add those. In fact, for some of our other institutes, we've seen teams as, I think, some over maybe as large as 24, around in that ballpark. So again, it just depends on the scope of what you're trying to accomplish and who you'd like to have represented there. But there is an additional charge for additional members to your team. So with that said, I'm happy to just kind of open the discussion regarding anything that I've talked about thus far. We've got this on the screen right now. If you do want to track down the Institute on Open Educational Resources, it is just aacu.org/OER. So I'm checking out the chat window at this point. I don't see any questions. Jeff, thank you for posing or placing some links to various things that I've mentioned into the chat window. That's certainly very helpful. But any questions at this point?
Any questions for Eddie? I will ask Eddie.
Okay.
What is how is it looking for AAC&U events moving forward throughout the rest of the spring, summer, and into the fall?
So we're pretty much committed to online for the remainder of this calendar year. So our fall conferences, our summer institutes are all going to be online. And for the annual meeting, I would not say that we have 100% finalized the strategy there, but the intention or the hope or the goal is to have a hybrid event of some sort. The face-to-face portion would take place in Washington, D.C. That's where the annual meeting was supposed to be. And of course, that's like the third week of January in 2022. But again, we're trying to stay flexible and fluid. We'll see how things continue to unfold from multiple perspectives, not just where is COVID at the moment, but also specifically where do campus budgets appear to be. I mean, we typically send out surveys to help us make some of these decisions as well to our membership, but that's what we're looking at right now for the rest of this calendar year. I believe all events are online, and then we're hoping to be able to turn a corner as we get into 2022. But again, we're just looking at the crystal ball and trying to make the best decision possible.
I know that a lot of institutions have frozen travel funds throughout the rest of the year. I know my institution is one of those that no institutional travel through at least December. So it's even as things do potentially open up, it's good to hear that online options will remain available for institutions and folks at institutions that couldn't maybe otherwise travel due to institutional restrictions and funding.
Yeah, I mean, a big component of the annual meeting. So the forum that it's historically been the Forum on Digital Learning and ePortfolios. We've made a decision to actually rebrand it and change its vision but also that component will indeed be fully online, but it's now going to be called the Forum on Open Learning and ePortfolios. So you can see that it's going to have a different direction. The call and of course the description of that forum will be reflected in that. But that's one component that will certainly, we've made the decision to make that fully online.
Yeah. Another question that I had was, has there been any kind of further discussion around value rubric revision? I know that's something that has been kicked around on some occasion, but
yes, the short answer is yes, definitely. And we're pursuing funding to support that work. There's a number of different mechanisms for collecting feedback on the rubrics, and we have kind of almost a warehouse, if you will, of feedback over the years regarding the value rubrics. And there's definitely opportunities for the value rubrics to better reflect the current moment in higher education and to just reflect that feedback and to improve them. So yes, that's definitely high on the list of our aspirations around our value work.
Is there any other questions from anyone still with us today? If not, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Eddie, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, being part of this webinar series, helping, giving us some perspective on upcoming events and activities of AAC&U. I know that open educational resources is something that's a topic for a lot of Texas institutions right now. So I encourage folks that were on the webinar today to check out that link and consider maybe sending a team from your institution and being part of that. I know that's something that Leap Texas is also going to be looking at, and we're hoping to do a webinar or two down on OER down the road, and maybe even opening up a hub on our Leap Texas website of OER related materials and suggestions, ideas, help guidance to highlighting what's being done in Texas and out around that topic to help guide institutions. So thank you all for participating today. Thank you again, Eddie. It's always good to see you and see what's going on with AAC&U.
You too. Thanks again for the invitation.
Bye-bye.
Bye.